Hello, and welcome to the APAC webinar series. I'm Nicole, your host for today. Today's session is titled Expand the Impact of Your Research Article, presented by Julia Ballard, Senior Manager, Partner Marketing at Wiley. With almost 15 years experience in scholarly publishing, Julia has a deep understanding of the research publishing landscape. She is responsible for the development and implementation of marketing strategies for Wiley's Asia Pacific publishing program, ensuring journal content and brands effectively engage the relevant scientific and academic communities. Julia works closely with Wiley's publishing and industry partners around the region, and she has a particular passion for helping researchers and authors maximize the impact of their work. Today's webinar is expected to last about an hour, and it will be recorded. The recording will be made available after the session has ended, and a link will be emailed to you. As always, we welcome questions from the audience. Please feel free to send through your questions anytime via the Ask a Question button located underneath the main video player, and stay with us till the end of the presentation for the Q&A session. Over to Julia now, who will begin her presentation.
Hi, everyone. I am delighted that so many of you are able to join me today to talk about how to maximize the impact of your work. I'm going to start today by taking a minute to really think about impact. This is why you as researchers, as clinicians, as practitioners, as experts in your field, this is why you do what you do, to create change, to make the world a better place, to share, to fix, to influence. This desire to change the world, to create impact, is central to who you are as researchers. But it's so easy to lose sight of this amongst the day-to-day work of researching, writing a paper, and then going through the submission, production, and publication process. Today, I'm going to walk you through some key areas where you can directly influence how much impact your paper will have once it's published. What you're going to learn might seem obvious to some of you. It might seem like a lot of work to some of you, but I promise it's not that hard, and it's so worth it. So let's get started. When we talk about impact in publishing, we're talking about three main areas. Getting read. How do you get people to read your article? This is about discoverability and visibility. And we measure this by looking at the number of article views, accesses, and downloads. Getting shared. How do you get people to share your article and engage with it beyond just reading it? The way we measure this is looking at activity with your article online using altmetric scores and reporting. And getting cited. How do you get people to cite your article, and how do you know how much it has been cited? There are a lot of citation metrics out there, and we'll talk about a few of them later. We're going to start by talking about how you make your article discoverable. How do you make sure that anyone who wants to read your article can easily find it? It all starts with search engine optimization, or SEO. In a world where researchers increasingly use the web to search for literature, and where that web is increasingly crowded, you need to do whatever you can to get your research to stand out and be discovered. Almost 60% of visitors to Wiley Online Library arrive via search engines such as Google. This means that if you publish an article in a Wiley journal, nearly 60% of people who read your article will have found it by typing keywords into a search engine. This is why increasing discoverability, access, and traffic to content is more important than all other promotional activities combined. Now, of course, we do a lot of work in the background on the Wiley Online Library publishing platform to ensure excellent SEO. But you, as the author, have a huge opportunity to influence the discoverability of your article from the very beginning. There are 4 key areas you should focus on: selecting strong keywords and titles, writing an effective abstract, and building links to your article. So let's go through each of these points in a little more detail. When you're thinking about keywords, you want to choose 15 to 20 appropriate keywords and phrases that are relevant to the topic. People tend to search for specifics, not just a single word. So allergy medication instead of simply allergy. So think of a few phrases of 2 to 4 words that a researcher might use to find your article, along with several individual keywords. Test your keywords in a search engine that your audience is likely to use. Check to see if your keywords return papers that are relevant to yours. Once you have your keywords, you want to use them in your title, your abstract, your subheadings, and your keyword fields. Keywords are not only important for SEO, they're also used by abstracting and indexing services as a way to tag research content. So do spend some time getting your keywords right. Remember to repeat your keywords and phrases in a natural, contextual way. Google's web crawlers can detect a practice called keyword stuffing, which is exactly what it sounds like. Stuffing your title and abstract full of your keywords without it sounding natural. Google does not like this practice and can de-index your paper if it detects you've done this. Your keywords need to make sense within the title and the abstract and flow well and naturally. The title of your paper is your chance to communicate the value of your work. While the keywords in your title are crucial for discoverability, your title is the first piece of information that someone sees before deciding if they will spend time reading your paper. So you want to communicate the main subject of your research as simply and clearly as possible. Keep your title to 15 words or fewer. If your title has more than 15 words, consider moving a phrase from your title to the first or second sentence of your abstract. Use keyword phrases in your title within the first 65 characters, and place the main concept of your paper in the beginning of your title. Don't use abbreviations or acronyms unless you're sure that the majority of your audience will recognize them. And try not to use phrases like effect of, involvement of, or evidence of. All these phrases do is add extra words to your title and make it less clear for your readers. Abstracts are one of the most powerful ways to boost discoverability of your article. Abstracts are almost always free access, which means that along with your title, they are the most widely read part of your paper. So use your abstract to express key points of your research clearly and in less complicated language than the rest of your paper. The abstract is not a miniature version of your paper. The abstract is your chance to champion your work and communicate its findings in a way that convinces readers of its value. Use 3 to 4 different keyword phrases in your abstract. And the first and second sentences of your abstract are the most often read sections of papers, aside from the titles. So place essential findings and keywords in these sentences if you can. An ideal abstract length is 7 to 10 sentences, but you should definitely refer to the journal you're submitting to and look at their author guidelines for clear guidelines on abstract length. Generally, there's going to be a limit of about 200 words for an abstract. Let your abstract have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning is where you should say why you did your research and what your main conclusions were. The middle is where you outline your research methods and design and provide any necessary background context. And the end is your opportunity to state your findings and highlight the value of your research and what it adds to the field. Now, to illustrate how all this comes together in real life, I Googled science communication and social media articles. And this is a very small sample of the Google search results that I got. You can see that the format of individual article results will vary. This is due to different publishers and journals having different SEO practices and platform designs. So you want to implement all these best practices we've just gone through in order to cover all the bases here. Note that in a typical search engine results page, you only see half the title and only a couple lines from the abstract. Don't waste these valuable spaces with words like in a randomized controlled multi-center study, or no one will know what your article is about. Instead, make sure you're using these spaces to convince someone to click on your paper rather than the one above or below it, or at least in addition to the ones above and below. The final thing that you can do as an author to really increase the discoverability of your article is to build links to it. The more links that point to your paper, the more important and trusted Google will consider your paper to be, which will help push it higher up the results page. 75% of users won't look past the first page of search results. So it's really important to do everything you can to make sure your article appears on the first page of the search, and the higher up, the better. So here are some tips. Links from institutional websites carry a lot of weight for page rankings. So it's important to use pages like your institutional profile. Reach out to members of your community for their support in building links to your content. Social media can be very helpful when it comes to building up a large number of links quickly. Create a network of colleagues who will build inbound links and citations to your article. The more links from respected individuals and trusted sites, the more powerful the effect. And of course, you should offer to do the same for them in return. And whether we like it or not, one of the first places many people look for information is Wikipedia. So consider finding a Wikipedia entry on a topic related to your article, update it with the results of your research, and use your article link as a reference. Finally, ensure that you're citing your own previous work where appropriate. Citations of your past work factor into how search engines rank your current and future work. Okay, so you've written your paper using good SEO practices, and you've submitted, been accepted, and been published. Congratulations. At this point, many authors walk away and start their next project. If you've done everything you can do with your SEO, you've already taken a big step towards maximizing the impact of your article. But there's more you can do. So now we're going to spend some time talking about how you can promote your work. Before we get into that, I want to address the question of how you can ensure your article is accessible. After all, there's no point in putting in all that effort to promote your article if people who want to engage with it can't read it. So let's spend a minute looking at how you can share your work. One of the most common questions I get from authors is, how can I share my work? If you visit Wiley Author Services, you will find this chart, which very clearly explains what you can do with each version of your paper. And you'll probably find that you're able to share your article more widely than you think. For example, you can share the final version of your paper via email to your colleagues, in course materials, in a thesis submission, at a conference as a presentation or a poster, in a grant application, and in private research groups on websites and some scholarly communication networks like Mendeley. You'll notice on the right side of this chart, there's a column called Wiley Sharing Link that allows you to share your article at any time. You can find this link on the homepage of your article. You'll see a share button, and when you click on that, you're then able to create a link you can use to give full access to your article via email or any of these social platforms. The screenshot that I have here is an article from a Wiley journal, but most major publishers have a version of article sharing. I would also recommend using howcanishare.it.com. This is a fantastic resource. It's not linked to any particular publisher. You can look up the DOI of your article and it will tell you the policies for that specific journal. Okay, so once you have your sharing link and you're confident that you're compliant with any copyright forms you've signed during the publication process, it's time to get started on promoting your work. And the first thing we're going to talk about is social media. There are lots of social media platforms you could use to promote your research. Today, I'm going to focus on Twitter and Facebook. Regardless of the platform, there are a few general rules to keep in mind around social media. The first is content balance. You need to think about the balance between original and shared content, as well as professional and personal content. As a guide, use the 5-3-2 method. So for every 10 posts, you should have 5 posts that are curated from other relevant accounts or sources. So these are retweets, shares, links to other people's articles or websites. You should have 3 posts that are content that you have created. If you're promoting a recent publication of yours, this could be 3 separate tweets, each one highlighting a different aspect or result from your papers. And you should have 2 posts that are personal and fun and add a humanizing factor to your account. The second thing is to remember that it's called social media. You need to engage with your followers and the rest of your community. Include questions in your posts. Respond to your followers' comments. And make sure that you're engaging with other credible, relevant accounts to build your followers and your reputation. And one more really important thing about social media posts. Use images and videos. Tweets with images receive 150% more retweets than tweets without images. Facebook posts with images see 2.3 times more engagement than those without images. In general, social media posts with videos have 48% more views. In addition to the extra engagement a video will bring to your social posts, we also know that having a video associated with your article, so creating a video abstract to go along with your article, can increase downloads by more than 150%. If you remember only one thing about promoting your article on social media, remember to use images and video as much as you can. You can use lots of different kinds of images, figures and illustrations from your article, any personal photos you've taken, and images from online royalty-free image sites. My personal favorite is Unsplash, but there are lots of others like Shutterstock and Pixabay. Now, obviously, creating a video does take a little more effort, but your publisher will have resources to help you. You could start by looking at WileyEditingServices.com to get an idea, and you can always make your own just on your iPhone. Let's spend a minute breaking down the elements of a good tweet. First, the basics. Be concise. Twitter has a limit of 280 characters, and you should use normal, everyday language. Use 1 to 3 hashtags to increase the visibility of your tweet. You should pick at least one branded hashtag, like the name of an organization or an event, and one broad hashtag that's relevant to the subject of your article. Mentions are a way to encourage interaction with other users. So @mention your co-authors, your journal editors, or society. Include a question or request an action from your followers to encourage engagement. And try to tweet at least once a day. Remember that 5-3-2 method that we talked about earlier. And when you include a video in your tweet, remember that Twitter prioritizes content with videos. So it's a really great way to get your tweet broad exposure. There is a limit of 140 seconds for a video on Twitter. And think about how quickly people scroll through their Twitter feed. You need to capture attention within the first couple of seconds of your video and be able to hold that attention without sound. Now let's talk about the Facebook post. Facebook allows for longer posts, so really think about your tone of voice and the content of your post. Craft a message that encourages comments and meaningful conversation. Again, include a question or request an action from your followers. And don't be afraid to use humor. On Facebook, you're going to use hashtags to spread awareness, and you also should be sharing posts from other accounts to interact with that wider community. When you include a video in your Facebook post, remember that Facebook also prioritizes content with videos. Videos on Facebook need to be between 20 seconds and 2 minutes long. And 85% of videos on Facebook are viewed without sound. So add subtitles if you can in order to make any dialogue still work without sound. So we've talked a lot about social media, but don't forget that there are other ways to promote your work. You could write a blog post or an article for outlets like Medium or The Conversation. Think about doing an episode for a podcast hosted by a colleague or your institution or your society. And don't underestimate the more traditional publicity channels. If you've written an article that you believe will change practice or policy, or something that you think journalists or the lay public will be very interested in, please do get in touch with the PR department at your university, institution, or hospital and let your journal editor, society, and publisher know. One really important thing to note here is that if you're looking for PR activity for your article, you need to alert people before your article is published, preferably as soon as it's accepted. Once an article is published, it's not as interesting for a PR department because it's not exclusive or brand new. Okay, so by this point, you've invested a lot of time and effort into SEO and promotion. Now, how do you know if that effort was worth it? And, what's the point of trying to increase impact if we don't measure it? So you remember at the start of this session, I talked about the 3 ways we think about impact: getting read, getting shared, and getting cited. There are lots of sites that track these different metrics. These are just a few of the main sites I would suggest you explore to look at various measures of impact. Of course, you all know Web of Science, the place impact factors are calculated. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the impact factor, and then I'll talk you through altmetric in a little more detail. One of the most well-known and widely cited citation metrics is, of course, the journal impact factor. So just in case anyone here doesn't know, the impact factor is calculated as you see here. For the 2019 impact factor for Journal A, which will be released in June of 2020, so in a couple of weeks, we would look at the number of papers published in Journal A in 2017 and 2018, the number of citations in papers published in any journal in 2019 that reference those papers from Journal A in 2017 and 2018. And then we divide the number of citations by the number of papers to get a 2019 impact factor of 2.463 for Journal A. So essentially, it's the ratio of citations received in year 3 to material published in years 2 and 1. In most of academia, the impact factor is still considered the standard measure of quality of a journal, which does tend to bleed down into measuring the quality of an individual author's output. But it does have a number of significant disadvantages, which are really important to understand. Now, there are a couple of good things about the impact factor. It is a sound premise. It's very transparent. All the data is available publicly, so you can go in and check for yourself that the calculation is accurate. It is a really quick and easy way to understand how many citations per paper a particular journal receives on average. And it's been around for almost 50 years, so it's really well established. But, as I mentioned, it does have some real disadvantages. Only citations in journals indexed in the main Clarivate indices are included in the calculation. There are lots of journals out there that might publish articles that cite your article, but those journals aren't included in the relevant Clarivate indices, and therefore, those citations don't get counted in the impact factor calculation. The 3-year citation window doesn't work for all subject areas. While articles in medicine and health science are most relevant within the first 2 years after publication, many social science and humanities articles see the bulk of their citations 3 or 4 or even 5 years after publication, and those citations aren't included in the 3-year impact factor. A citation is not necessarily a validation. Sometimes something might be cited in order to refute it. For example, that retracted Lancet paper by Andrew Wakefield, the one that sparked the MMR vaccine controversy, has been cited over 1,100 times. Again, citation is not the only measure of impact. There are other services that we'll cover where you can draw additional useful metrics. Some article types will just naturally have more citations than others. Review articles, for example, typically attract far higher than average citations because of their single document state of field analysis. Always remember that humans are doing the citing and humans make mistakes. Mistakes in citations become mistakes in the citation count. The errors in citation count are estimated to be somewhere in the region of 7% per year. The denominator, or the number of articles published, only includes certain article types, which Clarivate calls source items. Non-source items, such as news articles, letters to the editor, opinion pieces, are not counted towards the article count because these are generally rarely cited, and the intention was to avoid penalizing journals that do publish these article types. This works both ways, though, with some journals that publish particularly interesting non-source items can have artificially inflated impact factors. And this is kind of one example of the potential for manipulation, where journals try to game the system. We see this in practices like high self-citation, or even citation rings, where editors trade citations in material like editorials in order to artificially boost citation counts for one another. And these citation rings can be really hard to detect. Now, good or bad, it's important to remember that the journal impact factor is based at the journal level. If we want to look at a metric that defines impact at the author level, we would look at the H index. Essentially, the H index evaluates the productivity and the impact of individual authors based on citation as a unit of quality. The larger the number of important papers, the higher the H index, no matter where the work was published. You can see the definition here, and this is how you can think of it. Have I published one paper that's been cited at least once? If yes, then you have an H index of 1. Have I published 2 papers that have each been cited at least twice? If yes, you have an H index of 2, and you continue to repeat this line of questioning until you answer no. So, Allison is a researcher and has published at least 10 papers, each of which has been cited at least 10 times. Allison has an H-index of 10. The H-index is widely used and automatically generated by Scopus and ISI, but it has a few problems also. There's that same subject area dependency that we saw with the journal impact factor. Medical sciences and pharma articles generally receive higher citation counts, so authors working in health sciences are likely to just naturally have a higher H-index than authors working in social sciences. It favors older authors over younger authors. You know, the longer you're in the game, the more papers you produce, and the more time they have to be cited. And an H-index will never decrease, but can definitely continue to increase even after an author's death. Now, looking beyond the impact factor, how do you see the results of your SEO efforts and all the work you put into promotion via social media and blogs and podcasts and PR? This is when we look at the altmetric attention score. Your article's altmetric score is essentially a record of how many mentions your article has had online in a wide variety of places like social media, mainstream media, and policy documents and patents. You can find your altmetric score on your article's homepage. All major publishers now include the altmetric score on article pages. This is an article published in Drug and Alcohol Review. You can see the altmetric score here. And when you click on the altmetric score of any article, a little box will pop up showing you the online activity that altmetric.com has picked up. You can then click through to a comprehensive report. And the fascinating thing about this report is that it shows all aspects of the impact of the published research. Yes, it does include academic sources, but also social media mentions, news, and blogs, and policy impacts. Now, it's important to note that altmetric.com can only capture instances where there is a direct link to your article. So it won't pick up a mention of your article in a newspaper if the journalist has linked to the journal instead of your article, even if your article title is mentioned. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Whenever you're doing your own promotion, make sure you're linking directly to your article. And if you're doing some promotion where someone else will be writing about your article, insist that they use your article link. Impact factors are great at showing us the impact of research in a 3 or 5 year citation window. However, these kinds of alternative metrics give us a richer and deeper insight into the influence and benefit of research over time. This is also a really great way to see who's interacting with your article on social media. You can then connect with those users who are interested in what you're doing and start to expand your social media network. Now, I hope this session has given you some ideas about how you can influence the impact of your work, and I hope you're all feeling energized and inspired to go out and get started on promoting your publication. We have lots of time for questions. So I'll open things up to you. I see there are a lot of questions that have already come in. So feel free to go ahead and continue typing your questions in, and I will just start going through and answering them. So there is a question about saying if your article doesn't have open access, then only your abstract can be shared. Is it okay to share in personal email and ResearchGate, et cetera? So I would call your attention back to sort of the middle of my presentation when I talked about howcanishareit.com. That is a great place to be able to go and find out where you can share your article and still be within the copyright guidelines. Also, I mentioned the Wiley article share link. And again, every publisher has a version of this and allows you to create a link that anyone will be able to read the full text of your article. So please do use that link whenever you're promoting your article so people can read the full text. Now, this is a great question. What's a better way to see the quality of a journal apart from the impact factor? That's a really common question, and one that's quite hard to answer actually, because one thing the impact factor does provide is sort of an equal platform to measure impact, right? It's a real measurement with numbers. Once you get beyond that, then it's a little bit more subjective. So you would want to then look probably more within your field. What journals do your colleagues and your supervisors read? What do you look in to find the most up-to-date content? What journals do you trust more than any other journals? That's where you're going to kind of start to see what when you define impact that way. You could also look up individual articles from journals in altmetric.com and see which ones are having an influence in policy. And that might be a way that you want to you want to assign impact to a journal and quality to a journal. Once a paper has been published, is there a way to optimize the SEO towards that paper? Again, great question, right? A lot of you now are probably thinking about articles that you published recently, and you didn't put in all the great SEO best practices from the start. And I'd say at this point, what you really can do is then focus on promotion. So you can still build links to that article. You can really take advantage of that step of the SEO. So promote it on social media, make sure it's in your institutional profile, put it into any relevant content that you can, where there will then be a link pointing back to your paper. So the question, how could you overcome the subject area dependency with the impact factor and the H-index? And there really isn't any way to do that. It's just the nature of how citations work. But what I would say is that, a researcher working in geography, there's, kind of a range of impact factors and H-indexes for authors in geography. So you just be looking at that subset to kind of compare yourself and compare your journals amongst those. And it's completely unfair to compare the impact factor of a journal in geography to an impact factor in a journal in oncology. They're apples and oranges. So it's really important to understand what you're comparing and make sure that you're comparing like with like. Do you subtract the self-citation with the calculation impact of any published article? No. Self-citations get included as long as they're in the citation window, which we talked about. It has happened in the past, though, that Clarivate, or the Web of Science, has noticed the journal doing a particularly large amount of self-citing throughout its articles, and when that happens, there is a threshold, about 20 to 30%. Journals have been kicked out of the Web of Science entirely and have had to wait a couple of years to reapply to be back in to prove that they have stopped doing that. So again, that's a way that people try to game the system. And, Web of Science knows about that, and they don't just let that go without any kind of punishment. So do absolutely cite your own work when it's appropriate. You should. But but your publisher and your editor will be looking over things to make sure that it's not becoming outrageous throughout the entire journal. Can I re-explain the 5-3-2 rule? Yeah, let's go back and look at that one more time. Give me 1 second. I'll jump back to that slide. So the 5-3-2 rule, we remember, is about, hang on, wrong slide. It's about the content balance in your social media account. So you're thinking about every 10 posts that you have. Sorry about this. Think about every 10 posts, and for every 10 posts, you should have 5 that are curated. So you're resharing, you're retweeting, you're linking to something else. 3 of every 10 posts should be content that you have created. So you're commenting about your own article, you are linking to something you have written, you are tweeting about a key finding in your most recent paper and linking to that paper. 2 of those 10 posts should be personal and fun. You're linking to something fun, you're posting a funny cartoon, you're talking about something funny that happened to you that day, or you're revealing something a little more personal about yourself. I hope that helps. Yeah, okay, so there's a couple of questions here on, my mention of Wikipedia. Right now, of course, as researchers, please do not base your findings on what you read in Wikipedia. That is not what I'm suggesting at all, and I very much hope that no one does that. But what I am suggesting is that you can look at Wikipedia and use your article as a reference in a Wikipedia article. So you're doing a couple of things there. You're building links to your article, you're getting your article out there for people to be able to see, and you're actually making Wikipedia a better place because you are using real peer-reviewed research to add to that article. There's a question about using the altmetric score instead of the citation score, instead of the impact factor of the journal. And that's still very much up to you as an author and as a researcher. I have heard anecdotally from a lot of people, especially in Australia, that in grant applications, they are increasingly being asked to include altmetric scores and evidence of policy impact from their research. So there does seem to be a little bit of maybe not a shift away from impact factor, but a recognition that impact factor doesn't tell the whole story. So yes, I would encourage you to always include your altmetric score and any interesting information you can pull out of an altmetric report in any kind of grant application or anything you're submitting to your institution for evaluation or anything like that. When common keywords are incorporated, will this encourage or increase the amount of plagiarism that's detected in a paper? That's a really interesting question, because you remember I suggested that you enter keywords into a search engine and see if the right kind of content comes up, and then you know you've hit on the right keywords. The way that plagiarism detection works usually is it's just a program that every paper is run through, and then the results are a percentage of words or percentage of the paper that is found to be the same as anything else, as another already published paper. No paper is never going to have zero. There are only so many ways you can conduct an experiment. So methods there's always quite a bit of overlap in methods in different kinds of papers. Keywords, similarly, you want there to be overlap in keywords in different papers because that's how you find papers. So no, there won't be any problem with plagiarism if the repeated words are obviously your keywords. What people are really looking for with plagiarism is, conclusions or data. Is it appropriate to form the title in a question? That's a really interesting question. I've talked to a lot of journal editors about this, and some journal editors really don't like that. Some editors love it. So it really depends on the journal you're submitting to, the editor of that journal, their personal preference, and they might make a suggestion about changing the way that your title is formatted if they like one or the other. I personally think a title that is a question makes it stand out a little bit, and it's a little bit more interesting. But again, remember sort of the golden rules about titles. If you can get the most important information into those first sort of 8 words of your title and still make it a question, then, definitely go ahead and try it. But have a look through the journal you're submitting to and see what kinds of titles they use. And that'll give you a really good indication of the kind of title that a journal editor is really going to like. Researchers are increasingly authoring research blog posts on Medium, for example. Is it logical for citation counts to include references to such blog posts too? Well, that's one of the downfalls of the impact factor, is that it only includes citations from journals that are included in the SCI, SCIE, and those indices. There are a lot of citations that are missed out on, even in peer-reviewed journals, let alone in places like Medium. Altmetric.com, however, will pick up those citations from Medium and other blogs like that. So that's where you can, if that's the kind of work that you're doing to promote your research, which is excellent, that's where you can sort of find evidence of that and have a report to show that work has been done, and you can see the sort of impact of that work in places like altmetric.com. How and where would you recommend sharing a video abstract? Well, I can't speak for every publisher in this particular case, but I can say that with Wiley, if you get a video abstract made for your article, that video abstract will live with your article on the article page. So every time someone opens your article on Wiley Online Library, that video will appear. So it's connected to your paper. Aside from that, I recommend sharing that video on social media, in any blog that you write, anywhere you would do other promotion. It's really important to share that video abstract. I think that people really often underestimate how much their society can do for them, their academic or scholarly society or college can do for them in terms of promoting their papers. You know, everyone has social media feeds to fill up these days. And a video, as I mentioned, is one of the best ways to do that. So don't ever hesitate to get in touch with your society and say, hey, I have this video that you can use. And you are free to use that anywhere and promote that anywhere. There are no copyright restrictions on a video abstract that you get made with a publisher or one that you make on your own. Would you recommend looking at the journal quartile, so quartile 1, quartile 2, instead of the journal impact factor? Yes, I very much would. I think that's a really useful way to look at things, because it's not always just about absolute numbers, and it doesn't matter if something's a 7.2 and not a 7.4. You know, there's no difference between those two journals in terms of impact factor, really. Even a 7 and 8 isn't really that different. But yeah, I think looking, you know, I want to publish in the top 25% of the journals in my field is a really good thing to aim for, rather than saying I want to publish in a journal with an impact factor above 14. This one's a little bit off topic, but something I hear all the time, so I do want to address it. I now get a lot of invitations to publish in open access journals. Do I have any thoughts on that? I sure do. Open access is, of course, a much bigger part of the publishing landscape than it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, you know, and certainly 20 years ago, it wasn't a thing anyone even had an idea about. So of course you're getting more invitations. The question then is, how do you know which invitations, which journals are reputable journals and ones you should consider publishing in versus ones that are not going to help your reputation academically? And there's a lot of things to look at there. So there's a database called the DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals. Any reputable open access journal will be listed there. So check that out, doaj.com. If the journal is not listed there, do not publish in it. Of course, there's often a lot of hints in the email that you receive. You know, obviously, if it's for something that's not in your own field, then it's probably not legitimate. Anything that is not coming from, you know, a publisher address, if it's coming from a Gmail address or something, and you don't know this person, that's probably a warning bell. But the safest thing to do is just always look at doaj.com, Directory of Open Access Journals, and check and see if the journal is there before you make any decision. I know there are a lot of other questions here, but I think I might stop there. And I know my other colleagues who are on this call are going to make a list of questions, which I'm happy to answer and get back to you as soon as I can come up with answers for you.
All right. Thank you, Julia, for your time and for sharing with us this very insightful presentation. And thank you to the audience as well for your participation and for asking the questions. Yes, Julia, we'll send you a list of all the questions here so that you can address any that you weren't able to today, so you can get back to them. I hope everybody found the presentation useful today. A link to the recording will be sent to everybody through email, so please check your email after this, probably by tomorrow. And have a good day ahead, everybody, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you and goodbye.